The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
All right, so we're about to be treated to Dr. Jana Paraiso. She is a fabulous presenter and an insightful educator. And so we're happy to have you here today. She's with Rutherford County Schools. She's been active in the collaborative. Thank you, Dr. Paraiso. And I'm going to let her introduce the session. So, Dr. Paraiso.
We're going to be talking about trauma-informed teaching. And that is something that you see and hear a lot in the news. I'm going to pull up just a little photo I want you to sit with for a minute. Trauma-informed teaching. A little bit too relevant, isn't it? This is something that educators are beginning to address. This is something, teaching with a trauma-informed mindset is something that shocked me when I first started teaching in an ESL program. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't thought about the necessity to be an advocate for my students. I hadn't thought about what they went through before they came to me. See, I had this mindset that you see on tote bags and on memes of a beautiful globe with little children in native dress holding hands. And they're just so happy to be in the United States. And I was just going to teach everybody English, and we were all going to make crafts, and we were going to eat, foods from their country, and everything was going to be wonderful. It didn't work out that way. It's still great. I love what I do, but it's different than the tote bag, and it's different than the poster and the meme. I don't know how many of you have listened to the news this morning, but on my way in, I was made aware on the news that the current administration is going to be enforcing new deportation rules starting Sunday. They are going to be raiding homes where anyone has received a deportation, where they think it is the address of anyone that has received a deportation notice and has not reported. And anyone that is in that residence is subject to questioning and scrutiny by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I have already this morning had texts from 2 different students. Now, my students are adultish, and I'll talk more about that. I have 17 years old and up. So I've already received texts from 2 students. What should we do? I'm here with my kiddos have temporary refugee status, but they may live in a household where they have someone that's not documented. What do I do? Thankfully, the ACLU put out something this morning in English and in Spanish. You can access it online. I did not have time before coming to see you all to post that, but I will, and I'll show you where I've put some resources. Our students and their families, their particular rights when they have to deal with immigrations and customs enforcement coming to their house. I don't know if you've ever had a student that has been deported. I've had several. And it is traumatizing. It is traumatizing not only for that student, but for the other people living in the household. So that's just one trauma. that we're going to be taking a look at. The kiddos that are being held in detention centers on the border. Where are they going to go to school in the fall? Assuming that they go to school in the fall. It's a likelihood that we might have those children. When we had the large group of students that came through, the large group of kids that came through, the border children in 2014, do you remember that? Rutherford County, we had so many of those kids. And a lot of them, they didn't come through and say, hi, I'm a border kid. They were part of that. And they brought their traumatic background with them. So I think the more informed we are about what these kids are experiencing and what we can expect as educators to offset what they bring to the classroom, the more prepared we'll be. And that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon, rather. I am so glad that you all chose to come here. I love this collaborative. I'm grateful to Dr. Clark for putting this together and her team. This is something that I have often thought was necessary for those of us that teach in Tennessee, but I just was not able to do this, and I am so glad that Dr. Clark took this on. And it's so nice to see so many familiar faces. I love this. As ESL teachers, we're often isolated because we're the only ones in the building. We might cover 2 schools. If we're really lucky, we have another ESL teacher. So we have colleagues. In those situations, most of us do not. Most of us, we're lone rangers. And so coming together, and the other thing is, have you ever noticed that when you tell people that you teach ESL, they get a funny look sometimes? Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Yeah. See, it's gotten to the point for me, unless I really want to get into it, I'm going to tell you my secrets. Unless I really want to get into it, I don't offer that information up first off. If I'm just meeting someone casually, and I probably will never see them again, and they say, hi, what do you do? I may just say, I teach English, and leave it at that. And particularly if I feel like they might be of a particular bent where they may not approve of what I do. I have actually had discussions with folks who told me that I should feel guilty for teaching immigrant children. And I said, well, I don't feel guilty for following the law. And I don't feel guilty for extending opportunity to human beings that deserve it. And those of us that are in this room, we know what that's like. Now, if we go to a social studies teacher conference, they probably don't have that level of advocacy for their kids. They might, but ours is a different ballgame. It really is a different ballgame. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. A time for healing. And that is something that we're going to focus on in our session today. In our session, these are the things we're going to be talking about. What is child traumatic stress? What are the effects of trauma on the brain? It actually affects the physical characteristics of your brain. What are the classroom implications, of child traumatic stress? The kids don't leave their problems at the door. They might not talk about them, but they don't leave them at the door. How does child traumatic stress affect homeless children and ELLs? Some of our ELLs actually fit the legal definition of homeless. That is, no fixed or regular place to stay at night. And a lot of our kids would qualify under the McKinney-Vento Act. And if you've got a McKinney-Vento liaison in your district, you may want to talk to them about getting some particular assistance for your kiddo. And what can a teacher do? And that, to me, is the most important takeaway. It's one thing for us to be in this big, wonderful room and talk about, these kids deal with so much. But in just a couple weeks, we're going to be having these babies in our classes. And we're going to be teaching them, and we're going to be worried about their WIDA scores and their 10 Ready scores, and how do we cut through all of that they bring to us? How do we cut through that to give them what they need? How do we cut through that to give them the literacy skills they need and the numeracy skills they need? Because honestly, we are not social workers. We're not therapists. We can't solve all of the challenges that they bring. We are teachers. So we need to find a way to work within the framework that the children bring and to expand their ability to learn. If we release our kids without the numeracy skills and the literacy skills that they need, then we further handicap them. So I would challenge all of us to not take the attitude of these poor kids. Pity doesn't solve it. Information, education solves it. Okay, what is child traumatic stress? Dr. Clark is going to post this for you, so I am definitely not going to read the whole definition. But suffice it to say, traumatic stress can come from a couple of different angles. Child traumatic stress can be from one huge event, such as a hurricane. When we got kids from Puerto Rico, they had been through a traumatic event. Some of them had lost their entire homes, their schools, they'd lost everything in one huge event. Another huge event might be a car accident where they lose a parent or family members. That's child traumatic stress. There is another kind of child traumatic stress, and that is prolonged over a period of time. And that can be just as devastating and just as harmful, if not more so, because it's sustained. And it's not usually recognized, and there's not usually overt help for that. For the kids that lost a family member to an accident or illness, there's help. Kids that had lost homes or family in a natural disaster, there's something out there. Our kids that fly under the radar and have something that's sustained and long-term, a stressor that's sustained and long-term, don't always have access to the kind of help that other children might have access to. For example, domestic violence. Domestic violence can take many forms. It does not necessarily mean that daddy is beating up mommy. That's what we normally think of. And we'll talk more about domestic violence and how it affects our population a little bit later on. But that is a stressor. That is a stressor that our children deal with. Another stressor is poverty. Most of our kids, and I'm going to generalize based on my experience with Rutherford County and based on the statistics, most of our kids in Rutherford County most of our ELs are on free and reduced lunch. So they come from a background of poverty. If you've talked to our kiddos that come here from Guatemala and Honduras, you know that the poverty is crippling. Even Venezuela. Over Christmas, we got a huge influx of students from Venezuela. They had not had to deal with poverty over the long term like some of these other students had. But very quickly, they went from being the haves to having nothing in their country. And that is a big shift for our kids. I had middle school kids this last year, middle school Venezuelan children who had been used to good schools. They'd been used to having servants at home, helpers, maid, and all of a sudden they're here and they're living with a family member and they don't have access to any of that stuff anymore. They are no longer, dad might be a janitor, whereas before he was an oil executive. That's a different kind of traumatic stress. So child traumatic stress is not just one thing. Child traumatic stress can take different forms. We define child traumatic stress as something, generally speaking, that occurs before the age of 16. We're not saying that after 16 you can't have child traumatic stress anymore. You're done. No. But for the purposes of our conversation, we'll kind of stop at that age. Let's talk about homelessness. I want you to think for just a minute. In fact, grab a scrap sheet of paper. You're not going to show me or anybody. I want you to jot down about 10 things that, and I mean things, not ideas, physical things that you have that if your house was on fire, or if you had to go on a long trip, that you would put in your suitcase. So jot down about 10, maybe more or less. I think my first one would be my computer, and my second one would be my kittens. My mom would have put down her makeup case. She loved makeup. Okay, when you're ready, share with somebody sitting near you what's on your list. Share with each other. Okay. Is there anyone that would like to share something off your list? I will not put you on the spot. I won't have everyone go around the rows and tell a thing. No. But is there something you would like to share? I shared mine. Would be my computer and my kittens. I do rescue kittens, so. Yes, ma'am.
I first listed my phone because it has tons of pictures on them. Then I thought, no, I have the memories, even though I might not have the pictures. Then I crossed it off, and I did not list anything because I am originally from Iraq, so I left in 2006, and I've been through a war, and we left the country with one bag of clothes. So you can replace anything except health and family members.
See, you know what I'm talking about. Yep. Okay, very good. Who else? I would put my phone down probably. Yes.
As a little practical, I thought like ID, first aid kit, phone.
Smart. ID, first aid kit, phone. Good. See, I didn't even think of the practical stuff. I'm thinking the fun stuff. Oh, my external hard drive. Anyone else?
So, make sure everyone hear me. I moved here from China.
Okay.
So I kind of understand like the ELL kids, like their mood. So if my house on fire, the first thing I'm gonna grab is my passport, my green card, and my diploma from China. So I can picture like how deportation will affect our students' learning in the future, because like a status in America is the most important thing for foreigners.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Anyone else want to share something that's on your list? Okay, yes.
I have an infant, so I put diapers and wipes.
Yes, you guys are so practical. Diapers and wipes. I have heard in the news that those are in short supply at these detention centers. So that's so practical. Good. Anything else?
I just put my daily medications because, they're hard to replace even if you have an excuse. They don't want to.
Yes. I didn't think of that either. Daily medications. Okay. Okay.
I was also going to share passport, but kind of like in a different perspective. I grew up in the Philippines, and we moved here 11 years ago, but my parents, it's like passport because it has a different meaning to me, because my parents waited 35 years. I wasn't even born yet when they were trying to get here. So that's 35 years of waiting. We had to take the citizenship test. It's a U.S. passport now, but it's just perspective, because even when you leave the country and you come back, I used to have a different line, and I used to get searched more and get asked questions for coming back to the US just because I had a green card and a Filipino passport. But now that I have the US one, it's so easy to just go through. So I think it's just the passport for sure.
The passport, that you come from a wonderful perspective that I wouldn't even have thought about. Thank you. Thank you. Now, imagine leaving everything on that list behind. Everything. Some of our kids come from other countries, and they have to leave something in another country. I had a little girl from Honduras who was very worried about her dog. And she couldn't wait to get back to Honduras because she had family members taking care of her dog. She couldn't wait to get back to Honduras to take care of her dog, to see her dog. And I did not have the heart to tell her, baby, you are not going back to Honduras. That's a loss that comes with the uprooting. But our kids, it's not just limited to our kids that come here from other countries. Kids that are born here can experience homelessness and have to leave things in the middle of the night. Some causes might be an economic challenge. Parent loses the job. The rent goes up. Oh, that wouldn't happen around Nashville, Murfreesboro area, would it? The economic challenges, health challenges. Maybe a parent comes down with cancer and can no longer take care of themselves. So they have to move in with a family member. Domestic violence, I mentioned that before. The domestic violence shelter here in Rutherford County has a place for families to live. And the location is not advertised, but they have students in the Murfreesboro City Schools and in the Rutherford County Schools that live at the shelter. And most of those kids, they're bused to their home zoned schools. Most of those kids were uprooted suddenly for safety reasons. Foster children would be another, although they're not legally considered homeless, they are still uprooted. But domestic violence, of course, is another cause for homelessness. And domestic violence affects our population, our ESL population, in a similar way and in a different way. I will tell you a story carefully of a family that I was aware of this last year. Father was here legally. Mother was here undocumented. There was a domestic violence situation. Father kept control of mother because he told her if she tried to leave him, if she did anything other than what he wanted her to do, he would call immigration on her. He would call the law on her, and she believed him. Wouldn't you? She had no power. She didn't speak the language. She had no place. So yes, there was physical violence involved in this particular situation, and ultimately she did leave. But that's a dimension that's not in your general domestic violence case. We have employers that withhold passports from their workers to keep them in control. So all of these can be contributing factors to family homelessness. And we've talked about natural disasters, so I won't belabor that too much. Youth homelessness, this is a little bit different. I'll be honest with you, we get quite a few legally homeless youth in my particular job because I have unaccompanied minors. So they are coming here already homeless. But youth homelessness can be due to abuse or neglect. It can be due to a parental conflict, pregnancy, economic challenges. Youth homelessness can be a challenge when a student comes out as LGBTQ. That's another challenge that is a childhood trauma situation. And don't think that it doesn't affect the ESL community, it does. We had a student just a few years ago in one of our schools, and I'm being purposefully vague, who was trans, female to male, and also a refugee, and also ESL, and also had challenges with the parents because of this issue. And it made learning difficult. Fortunately, this student had an extremely understanding teacher. And so many times we think of the LGBT issues don't affect our kids. Don't we have enough alphabet, ELL, ESL? We got enough. But they do. They can. And that can also be a cause for youth homelessness. Sometimes shelter policies force a family to be homeless. Some shelters only allow women and children, and the children can only stay as long as the oldest male child is under 12. So once they hit their 12th birthday, the family has to go because they can't stay. The boy is over 12 years old. What a big amount of pressure. And that's here in Middle Tennessee. What a big amount of pressure to put on a young man. He wouldn't want to turn 12 because if he turns 12, his family will be homeless because of him in his thinking. So that may be something to address with some of our faith agencies and some of our shelter organizations. The impact of homelessness on children and youth, our kids are sicker more often. They have asthma, they pick up bugs everywhere, depression and anxiety, untreated, unmedicated. Homelessness in early childhood is associated with poor classroom engagement. If you don't know where you're going to be sleeping that night, can you really concentrate? Tough. Achievement gaps, and we know this is what we do. Achievement gaps between the low-income, homeless low-income population and students from a more traditional background may even get worse over time. I had a former supervisor of mine who has since retired. When No Child Left Behind first came out, she was not thrilled with No Child Left Behind and the punitive measures that were being forced upon schools and teachers based on student test scores. And she used to say, the only thing student test scores tell us is the zip code. We can tell the test scores by the zip code. And in some instances, that's true. I won't say in every instance, but the kids that come from a higher socioeconomic background, as a general rule, tend to do better. And our kids that are homeless and our kids that are from low income have a tendency not to achieve. I'm not putting anybody in a hole. They certainly can. If you've read some of these amazing books like From Homeless to Harvard, it's definitely possible, especially if you've got educators that believe in you. Also, the dropout rate among homeless youth is disproportionately high. It makes sense, right? They've got to work, they've got to support themselves, they've got to support their families. In my instance, my kids have to support I have young men. I have a lot of young men that I work with, age 17 and above. And they are here. They fit the legal definition of homeless because they're usually here with an uncle or somebody. And they are here to earn money to send back home. And when they were picked up by immigration at the border, they're surprised that we enforce compulsory education laws. And that's how they come to see me, because I am the enforcer of the compulsory education. And they inform me straight up, when I turn 18, I'm going to drop out because I have to work. And I understand that. That's not necessarily their choice. A lot of my kids would love to keep going to school, but that's just not where they are right now. So all of that, just a little aside to help us aware that homelessness not only affects the general population, but it affects our population disproportionately. Something to be aware of. Now, how does trauma affect the brain? What do we already know? Have you heard of ACEs? Adverse childhood experiences. It's a new entry in the alphabet soup of education. You will see this term quite a bit. Adverse childhood experiences, it's the bad stuff that causes traumatic stress. This can be, and a lot of these we've already talked about, so I'm going to kind of go quickly. Abuse, which can be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, or a household dysfunction. It doesn't necessarily have to be abusive. You might have a relative that's incarcerated. You might have family members that are substance abusers. Mom and dad live at the home with the kids, but dad is an alcoholic. Or mom is a prescription drug addict. Mental illness also can lead to dysfunction and can contribute to adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, for our students. And I'm not just talking about the child's mental illness, the parent's mental illness can be a contributing factor. And of course, divorce, and there's been a lot of study on divorce. Something I did not realize, ACEs can have a lasting effect on health, behaviors, and life potential. The more ACEs that a student experiences, the more difficulty they may have as an adult. Say, for example, you grow up in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of childhood trauma. It can actually contribute to, say, for example, obesity levels. The stress causes your body to produce more cortisol, which then in turn hangs on to every fat cell and every calorie, and to protect you. Sleep disruptions can trigger more cortisol production. Increased obesity can then lead to prediabetes. It just spirals. It spirals, and this is what our kids can be dealing with. This is what we may be dealing with as adults too. It doesn't always necessarily go away. And you know what? It's part of life. We can't avoid it. We can't raise our kids, even in the best homes, we can't raise them in a bubble with sunshine and lollipops. We have to give them the tools to deal with the adverse childhood experiences. It's just that some kids have more to deal with than others. And I think our population may be in that category. There was a study that was done a number of years ago by Kaiser Permanente, and it was actually a study to determine how much adverse childhood experience, how much trauma affected the physiology of the brain, the actual physical structure. Now, Kaiser Permanente did this, and most, as you can tell by the chart, most of these participants were white, middle class, college educated, and insured. That's interesting, isn't it? Insurance makes a big difference. But they still yielded, even though this study was somewhat skewed in favor of middle class, it still yielded some good information. The more adverse childhood experiences that were listed by this control group, the more difficulties they had in other factors in their lives. This is a big, long study, so I would encourage you to look up the Kaiser Permanente Childhood Traumatic Stress Study just for a fun read. You'll learn a lot. New childhood traumatic stresses, new ACEs, poverty, that was not considered in the study. Racism was not considered in the study. Peer victimization, is that something that our kids have to deal with? Sadly, yes. Every kid has to deal with it. I think our students have to deal with it in a little different way because there is so much talk about immigration and illegal immigration more than we've experienced in the past. So our kids are dealing with a greater level of peer victimization. There are also conditions that affect our trauma, historical trauma, and local context. For example, growing up in a ghetto. That is local context trauma. Historical trauma may be trauma from a more historical standpoint, not like necessarily history books, but generational. And again, we see these behaviors in students with a higher number of adverse childhood experiences. Lack of physical activity, alcoholism, smoking, depression, diabetes, cancer, all of these occur in a higher proportion to students that have a higher proportion of adverse childhood experiences. Suicide attempts, broken bones. I don't know why broken bones, but yeah, broken bones. That was part of the Kaiser Permanente study. Missed work, drug use. Significant adversity also impairs developmental milestones. What they are finding as they do more and more research on the brain is that the stress hormones, such as cortisol, actually cut different neural pathways in your brain. So think of a big stream of water, okay? You've got a big creek out in your backyard. We get some big rains. The creek overflows, and the creek starts cutting new pathways into your field behind your house. That is what we're talking about when we talk about stress hormones. The stress hormones, like the water, cut different pathways in our brains, like the water cuts different pathways in the field behind your house. It actually changes the physical structure of our brains, and it can impair developmental milestones, especially in the first 3 years. I don't know if you all have ever done this, but I know when I have been in a situation where I have been in having a traumatic experience, a divorce, a sick child, whatever, my brain, I lose it. I can't remember anything. I can't remember where I put my keys. I can't remember. I have driven to the store and not remembered why I was there. In the middle of a traumatic time in my life. Have you ever been like that? Has that ever happened to you? And that happens to our kids too. Except they may not have the language to express it to us, or they may not feel comfortable expressing it to us. So they may be afraid that they're going to be deported on Sunday, but they may be afraid to tell us. Meanwhile, they've got all those emotions, causing all those stress hormones, cutting all these different neural pathways in their brains, and we want them to learn their short vowel sounds. Maybe we need to come at it from a little different perspective. This is a little short video that I'm going to play for you about how brains are built. It says it better than I could.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions repeated throughout a young person's developing years are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
When I watched this, my first thought was of my own children, and did I give them enough interaction when they were little? I have old kids. They're 29, 28, and 25. So that ship has sailed. I can only hope. But then I wonder about our kids that we have now. What are they getting at home? Are they getting that good interaction? Are those kids in the border detention centers getting that good interaction? And if they're not, when they show up in my 2nd grade classroom, in my 7th grade classroom, in my 11th grade classroom, what can I do to offset that deficit? And really, that's why we're here. We know that the brain development is vital, especially early on. But if it's not there, what can we do as teachers? And that's called serve and return, by the way. And I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but basically it's response. Babies naturally reach out to their caregiver, and you know, it's Maslow, it's Piaget, it's Erikson. How does the caregiver respond? Does the baby feel like they can rely that their needs are going to be met? If they do, then they can go on to the next step. If they don't, then they may be developmentally stymied and be a little bit crippled at that step. The serve and return shapes brain circuitry. I'm going to play part of this because it's really, really good, but because of time constraints, I may not play the whole thing.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
Not new information, reinforcing what we already know, and reinforcing that our students may be coming to us without that need met. Again, the secure attachment cycle, baby has need, baby cries, the need is met, and then trust develops. Insecure, or the trauma cycle, and again, this is not limited to babies. We're talking about babies right now, but it's not limited. Baby has need, baby cries, the need is not met, and so mistrust develops. Let me put it a different way. The 8-year-old has a need, the 8-year-old asks for help, the need is not met by anyone. What does the 8-year-old do? The 12-year-old has a need, the 12-year-old's need is not met. The 12-year-old is then called upon to meet the needs of the 8-year-old and the 5-year-old and the baby at home. What is happening to the 12-year-old's needs? That's reality for our kiddos. Have you heard of the still face experiment? This one's fun.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In this still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good.
So we've got kiddos, our own kiddos, that may be dealing with their own still face at home. Maybe parents are not even there. Maybe parents are in some sort of a substance abuse. When I deal with a teacher who doesn't know what to do with ESL students for the first time, we've all had those phone calls, right? This kid doesn't speak any English, how do I grade them? Well, okay, don't worry about that yet. First thing I tell that teacher that's panicking is smile, smile. Make your face warm. Make yourself welcoming. And yeah, this was an experiment with a baby, but our kids will do the same thing. And if they are not getting appropriate attention, they're going to act out in another way. And it's just, it's human nature. So this still face experiment illustrates more of how the stress affects our behavior. 3 different kinds of stress: positive stress, like meeting new people, like studying for a test, like getting ready to do a talk in front of a whole bunch of your colleagues. Tolerable stress, stress that everybody goes through, stress that people understand, a death in the family, a job loss, and toxic stress that goes on and on and on for years: abuse, neglect, addiction. You know, that those behaviors that are formed in childhood, particularly I'm going to address addiction. If you've ever sat in an Al-Anon meeting or read anything by adult children of alcoholics, those behaviors continue all the way into their 50s and 60s. Those behaviors continue their whole lives. The behaviors that those adults learned to survive in their childhood toxic stress environment, they take those behaviors with them into adulthood. Guess what? That happens with our ELLs. The behavior that my 17-year-old boys learned to survive the gangs in Guatemala those behaviors are going to get them kicked out of Smyrna High School. Those behaviors are going to get them put in another situation. Those behaviors are going to get them in trouble. I had a young man who was from El Salvador. And in El Salvador, where he was, you run from the police. If a policeman stops you, the police are actually worse than the gangs. So you run. So Jonathan had an issue where he was driving, he didn't have a license, police pulled him over, he got in trouble, had to go to court, came to school, told me about it. I said, well, it's good that you stopped. You can't be driving anymore. He kept driving. Was pulled over again, and this time he ran. And long story, but Jonathan ended up being deported. The behavior that he learned in El Salvador to run from the police did not serve him well here. So in some instances, we're going to be reteaching behaviors to our students because they are learning behaviors from toxic environments of toxic stress. I wanted you to see this, an MRI of a healthy brain and an abused brain. Notice that the actual physiology changes. This is a PET scan. An abused brain, the amygdala shrinks. It alters brain development. The prefrontal cortex is affected, the hippocampus. The amygdala, which activates the stress response, is affected. Tennessee Department of Health has begun addressing the issue of childhood traumatic stress seriously in the last couple of years because more and more longitudinal research is being published that shows that students that are dealing with this have a harder time achieving in school. Well, maybe we should take a look at it. The one takeaway I want to call your attention to is that it is a fact everyone has adverse childhood experiences, but it does not determine our fate. And if we give our kids tools, we can help them overcome what they are dealing with. It's not destiny. Some children have a harder time dealing with toxic stress than other children do. There's a study where students are compared to ostriches and another bird. I think it's like a bluebird and an ostrich. But bottom line, the ostriches don't deal with stress quite as well. And some children are more susceptible. Some adults are more susceptible. It does not have to be the parent that can be the caregiver. If your student does not have a parent that can step into that caregiving role, then there may be an opportunity for you to do it. There may be an opportunity for someone else. There's hope. That's the bottom line. There's hope. Interventions at any point make a difference. Even into adulthood. Your ACEs are not destiny. So the shift that I want us to take into our classrooms is to shift the conversation. When we've got a student that's showing problems, that's giving us difficulties, instead of asking, what's wrong with you? Change that question to, what has happened to you? And just that little mental shift in our way of thinking can make us more open to discovering how we can reach this kid. So what do we do in a classroom? Where do we even start? We start by our classrooms. We look at the students that are having problems. Again, some of them are master manipulators. They're manipulating the situation. They may display extreme adult-like behavior or extreme child-like behavior. So understanding our students, the effects of childhood traumatic stress on education are a number. We've talked about some of these. Some of them may be interrupted schooling. If it's not safe to go to school in your home country, you don't go. I have lots of kids that is their challenge. They cannot walk the mile to school because the gangs, it's on gang turf and it's not safe. So they don't go. Those are called our SIFE students. That results in gaps in learning. It results in a lack of focus, cultural shift in priorities. The relationship with peers may be affected. It's really hard to trust your friends when you don't know if you can trust your friends. And again, like my Jonathan that I told you about, our students may have a real distrust of authority. How do we address this? Bottom line, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. We establish relationships. We get to know the students and their families. We do our best to bridge the cultural gap. We provide supports for educators. You know, we're not the only ones that are teaching these kids. And I don't think that there is a teacher that exists that is in the profession because he or she hates children. I've never encountered that. I've had some that I question, like, why are you doing this? But for the most part, people that are in our profession are in this profession because they want to help kids. So I want to give us all some tools that we can take back and that we can share with our colleagues. What can I do in my classroom? First of all, we give our kids hope. Again, ACEs are not your destiny. Just because you came from a bad background does not necessarily mean you are forever determined to live in poverty and violence. I would ask you to take a look at some of our Holocaust survivors as examples. That certainly would be a childhood traumatic experience. And yet many of our Holocaust survivors have gone on to have families, to have successful businesses, to make something of their lives in spite of the fact that they faced horrific challenges growing up. And that is something that I challenge our students. Now, I'm not going to generalize. I have a lot of contact with Holocaust survivors and their stories just because of the nature of my job. But not everyone has turned out to be all rosy. There are 80-year-old men still having nightmares. And that obviously is never going to go away. But they have learned, many of them have learned to overcome those stressors. And their recommendations for how they did it can serve as signposts for our kids. So it starts with hope. Where do we begin? Again, shift from a model that asks, what is wrong to you, to one that asks, what has happened to you? That immediately begs us to listen. Tell me about your background. Tell me what happened. Another question would be, how can I shift practices to more effectively respond to your needs? Well, let's take a look at some of those. Who are the children? Any child. And we've already talked about most of these. Any child. Trauma is a silent epidemic. Most of our kids are not going to walk into the classroom and just tell you everything. Although I have had that happen. I had one little girl in my classroom come in and we were doing our Coming to America stories, and she wanted to tell me all about how her family, she sat on her dad's shoulders and they walked across the river late at night from Mexico. And I'm like, that's a good story. Let's choose a different story. We were making movies. Let's choose a different story for our movies. So they may tell you, most of them do not. So it can happen to any student, even your higher socioeconomic students. Trauma is not limited by socioeconomic status, race, or beliefs. ELLs are affected disproportionately because of war, poverty, and violence, bullying, and language and cultural barriers. Why do we even want to deal with this? Don't we have enough on us dealing with test scores and administrators and my team evaluation, and now I have to get in so many in-service hours? Because the children will perpetuate the environment that they grew up in unless they know something different. Unless they know something different, our natural tendency is to perpetuate what we grew up with. I don't know about you, but when I first started teaching, my classroom delivery and management style was very similar to the classroom management and delivery style in the schools where I attended. So I had to unlearn some of those behaviors and relearn some different ones. So that's just human nature. Students have a tendency to repeat what they've dealt with. But learning how to deal with children in a trauma-informed manner will benefit everybody. It's just like PSYOP, okay? When you study PSYOP, it's for ESL kids, but it doesn't hurt the other kids. Studying trauma-informed strategies will really help your trauma-affected students, but it's not gonna hurt your other kids, like a wheelchair ramp. You know, I remember the days before the Individuals with Disabilities Act, when if I had a stroller or a cart or something, I was having to haul that puppy up flights of stairs. And all of a sudden, in the late 80s, everybody had to have a wheelchair ramp. I didn't have to do that anymore. I'm not disabled, but you know, I could whiz bang my stroller up the wheelchair ramp or up the elevator. It was great for everyone. So like a wheelchair ramp or an elevator is good for the handicapped student, these strategies are good for every student. This is an acronym. It sounds so simple, and you know what it is. To create healing in our classroom, these are the steps we need to begin to address. Being honest and encouraging our students to be honest. To create an environment where the student is valued. Keep in mind that this is an academic situation. We're not social workers, we're not therapists, we're teachers. Loving. And I don't mean pity and touchy-feely. Sometimes love is just, and sometimes we have to do things that may not seem loving at the time, but then later on, our student realizes that they are. Inclusive, nurturing, and a growth mindset. Again, and I can't say this enough, doing away with pity. Oh, these poor kids spent 3 months in a border detention center. Yes, they did. And so how are we going to give them, what tools are we going to give them to get past that? So not acknowledging that it didn't happen, not saying don't talk about it again, which has been something that our Holocaust survivors have said. They didn't talk about their experience, and that hampered them later. So encouraging the kids to talk about it, but then saying, okay, how do I get from where I am now to where I need to be? That's a growth mindset. Specific things that we can do. Routines. Routines are so important. The kids that come from a more traumatic background need routines that they can depend on. They create safety, predictability, and actually routines regulate the nervous system. We know what to expect. I saw this in my own family. I see this in my own self. During the summer, I'm naturally a night owl, and I don't like that because I want to get up early, but I don't want to go to bed early, so I'm up at 3, and then I want to get up at 7, and no. But when I go back to my school time routine, in bed by 10, then I notice, okay, I feel more relaxed. I know what's coming. I do what my inner Jiminy Cricket is telling me I need to do. Rituals, these are routines with meaning. Maybe you have a birthday ritual that you do for all your students. Maybe you have a student of the month, whatever it is, and every classroom is different. Something that is a routine with meaning with your kids. With my ESL adults, we celebrate birthdays at the beginning of the month. So all of my August birthdays, we have a birthday party sometime at the beginning of August. We have all of our September birthdays, beginning of September. When we first started doing this, nobody told me that part of the ritual is to smash somebody's face in the cake. Do you know about that one? I didn't know about that one. I got my face smashed into the cake. I wasn't happy, and then all of a sudden I was, so it was okay. It was a ritual, a routine with meaning, so all is good. But be intentional. Think of some rituals that help your students to cope. Maybe it's something about expressing gratitude. My friend Jill Coble had a wonderful ritual that she did with her students every Monday morning. She would have a coffee klatch with her ESL middle schoolers, and they would sit around a big round table, and she got milk for them. So they all had milk, and she would usually bring some sort of a pastry or some snacky type thing, and they would talk about what they did over the weekend. Simple. She didn't really spend any money because she collected the milk from the cafeteria. It was the unopened milk cartons that the kids were throwing away, so she'd be like, I'll take that, I'll take that. And she saved it. So she really didn't spend a lot of money. But just having something to do with your hands, having something to put in your mouth, lowered the affective filter, and the kids started talking. They were more comfortable sharing what they did. And you know what? They were practicing their oracy skills, and they didn't even know it. They just thought that they were talking. We didn't do anything. We were just talking. Yeah, I know. You weren't doing anything at all. Regulation. Make sure that you have a set of rules and consequences, and the kids know what's coming. Don't spring anything on them. They've had enough unexpected things. And then again, relationship. The key to learning. I can't stress that enough. I've been in this business going on 37 years. Do you believe it? I'm going into my 37th year of teaching. I can't even believe that. And the kids, you know, they find you on social media after you've been teaching for so long. I've never had a single student find me on Facebook and say, thank you so much for teaching me long division. It was the best thing ever. No, I had my former 5th grader, who's now 40-something-year-old mom of 4, email me through Facebook and say, do you remember when we had the hamster wedding? Yes, actually, I do remember the hamster wedding. That was a long time ago, and I was 22, and I really should not have done that, but I'm glad you remember it. They will remember the home visits. They will remember the kind words. They will remember the relationship far more than they'll remember the content. No, I'm not negating the content. We've seen those teachers that are, you know, they maybe don't want to do the content because they want to do all the social, emotional, touchy-feely, and I'm not dissing social, emotional. That's extremely important. But it's not the only thing, just like academics are not the only thing. It's a balance. So relationships, building that social emotional relationship with your students, make the academics possible. Specific activities. Let me tell you about what a comfort box is. A comfort box can either be a physical box that you like, or it can be an online place that you go, and you put things in there that bring you comfort when you need it. I have a comfort box. I have some family photos in there. I have some paparazzi jewelry in there. I have a tea bag in there, chai tea, my favorite. I have some things in there that if I'm really going through a stressful time, mine is a little cardboard box. I got it at Dollar General. They got really pretty boxes, by the way. And it's black with red polka dots. And I open it up, and just touching those things calms me down. So create a comfort box. Create a comfort box for yourself. Show your kids something that they can address. A coping plan. What are you going to do when you get too stressed out? What is your plan? And creating a plan in advance. Mindfulness exercises, I will caution you here. Mindfulness exercises can be difficult with students that come from a traumatic background. So you may not want to address that. We will talk about more of these if you come to my next session, which is self-care for educators. A lot of it is stuff that we're already doing. Just I would encourage you to be more intentional with it and to take care of yourself. We are teachers. We are very prone to compassion fatigue. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.